Hi everybody, my name is Peter Hiller and it is my pleasure to read you a story today. This is a story written by a man named Joe Mora, who I think is one of the most interesting artists that I have ever heard of. He not only was an artist, but he was a sculptor and he was a writer and an illustrator, and in fact he even painted the painting that's in back of me here. One of the things he did for his children was write stories for them. He had a son and a daughter. His son's name was Joey. His daughter's name was Patty. And when they were little children, he would write stories and he would draw the pictures for the stories. What I'm going to do for you today is read one of his stories. It's called Chippie the Munk, and it's about Chippie the Great Inventor. Once upon a time, there was a little chipmunk who was the smartest little chap anybody had ever seen for a long, long time. His name was Chippie the Munk, and he lived in Happy Hollow, which is way back in the woodland, far beyond where Grandpa John lives. As he grew older, he kept getting smarter and smarter, and then began to invent things, until his folks all around had to say, ah, and oh, every time he showed them something new. When he was in the 4th grade, and I bet some of you were in the 4th grade, he invented a blackboard eraser that worked dandy and made the teacher very happy. It was an eraser that he snapped on old Fido's tail. And then, when he had erasing to do, Chippie would back him up to the board and then begin to whistle. At that, Fido would wag his tail this way and that, and swish, swish would go that eraser and clean up the chalkboard slick as could be. Then, when he grew a little older, he invented a patent nutcracker. Just look at the picture of it right here and you will see how it worked. There was a long board on top with a hinge at one end and a chair at the other. Now, when they had lots of nuts to crack, they would invite Dude Beagle to the party. Dude was a very nice doggy, and he was so polite that he would never sit down when any ladies were standing. So Chippie would put a nut under the board near the hinge, and then the girls would sit down and say, "Sit down, dude, and make yourself to home." And when he sat down, crack-o! There was the nut all ready for picking. Then one of the girls would stand up and say, "Oh, excuse me for a minute while I go to the kitchen to see that the cookies don't burn in the oven." At that, of course, Dude would stand up, and then Chippie would take out the cracked nut, quick as a flash, and put in a new one. The girl would soon come back to sit down, and then Dude would do the same when crack-o, and there would be another nut ready. They would keep this up all afternoon, and by the time they had given Dude a couple of cups of tea and half a dozen cookies, they had a fine mess of nuts all cracked. Now, wasn't that a grand invention? Well, one day all the folks from Happy Hollow held a meeting, and it was then that Uncle Castor Beaver, who was pretty smart himself and could read and write, told that he had read in a paper he found floating in his pond all about a big flying machine that had been invented and could fly all around, even up through the clouds. When he heard that, old Grandpa Gopher, who was quite a crosspatch at times, jumped up and cried out that he did not believe one word of it, and that it could not possibly be done. Then Castor said it could, and Grandpa said again it couldn't, and Castor said it could, and Grandpa again said it couldn't. They got so fussed up they nearly had a fight about it, and everybody seemed to join in, some on one side and some on the other. Cousin Marmot Woodchuck was the chairman of the meeting, and he kept pounding away at his gavel. A gavel, you know, is the wooden hammer a chairman uses to pound on the tabletop to make the folks keep quiet. but everybody there made so much noise you could not hear yourself think. Finally, Brother John A. Rabbit, everybody called him Jack Rabbit, jumped up and called out, "Folks, why make all this fuss and noise? Maybe it's true, and maybe it isn't. But I'll bet that if such a thing can be done, we've got someone right here among us who could invent it. Yes, sir, if it can be invented, our own Chippie the Munk can do it." Oh, how everybody did clap and clap. And then they got hold of Chippie and took him up in the front and told him to make a speech. So after a while he said, "Folks, I get awful scared when I have to make a speech. Anyhow, I never saw a flying machine and never heard of one. But I can try to invent one if you really want me to. The only trouble is that a machine like that will cost quite a lot to make, and I'm not rich enough to pay for it myself." "Hooray!" they all yelled. Then Grandpa Mole wandered up, and when the folks quieted down, he said in his wheezy little voice, "Friends and neighbors, if Chippie says he'll try, I'll say he'll do it. And if he tries to make something that will fly up in the clouds, we folks of the underground will help. I've got 50 seeds I've been saving for many months, and I'll give 40 of them right now to help. That's what I'll do." "Hooray for Grandpa Mole," was the cry that went up. And soon they heard little Terry Pin, the turtle, trying to make himself understood. "Folks, listen to me. Listen to me. If Grandpa Mole can donate 40 good seeds from the underground, we of the underwater can do as much. I've saved up one whole can of worms for bait. Well, I've got half of that as our share, and you all know how much we can sell these worms for when the fishing season starts. Hooray, hooray, good for Terrypin," they all yelled. Everybody was getting very much excited over all this good news, when Jack Rabbit once more jumped up and waved for the crowd to quiet down. Then he said, "Grandpa Mole has donated for the underground, and Terrypin has done likewise for the underwater. Well, folks, it is plain to see someone must give for the overground, and I'm the one to do that. I've saved up 100 prime kernels of Farmer Jones's corn. I'll give 75 of these." Hooray, hooray, hooray for Jack Rabbit! They all got so noisy now that it took Cousin Marmot a long time to make them keep still. Then when they finally elected a building committee to take charge of the donations and gave Chippie any help if he needed it. Later on, they fixed up the old deserted house at the mill pond, and not long after that, Chippie moved in with all his tools and supplies. He shut himself away from everybody just to invent and build. Officer Hound, the village policeman, kept guard there on the outside, morning, noon, and night. When nobody heard or saw anything of Chippie for many a day and many a week, though some folks claimed that they had seen lights in the mill house very late at night, and that he must have been working very long hours. However, others said that these folks must have seen fireflies there instead of window lights. Well, anyhow, nobody saw Chippie, and when anyone would wander too near and try to peep in at the windows, Officer Hound would wave his club and chase them away. And so it was that day after day passed until it seemed folks just couldn't wait any longer without some news. They all got so fussy and fidgety, it seemed they could stand it no longer. Then at last, Officer Hound came to the village and told everybody that Chippie was nearly ready, and for everybody to be at the picnic grounds on the 4th of July at 12 o'clock noon sharp. My, but everybody was happy then, and when the glorious 4th arrived, everybody was ready for the fun. They were so excited they could hardly pack their picnic baskets. And when it got close to noontime, they were so flustered they did not know what to do. Some ran here and some ran there, and all kinds of questions were asked, and all kinds of guesses were made. The building committee was there on the field, and though they were just as excited as anybody, they tried to look wise and calm. Then Marmot Woodchuck, who had been looking at his big watch for the last half hour, raised his paw and called out, "Folks, it's just 12 o'clock, this very second, but where is Chippie?" At that instant, Little Big Ears, the rock mouse, who had climbed on top of a boulder to see better, piped up at the top of his little mousy voice, "Look, look, over yonder by the old dead tree on Lone Pine Hill. What is it? What is it?" Everybody jumped up and looked that way. Then Marmot bawled out as loudly as he could, "It's something in the air. What is it? It's a bird. It's a bird. No, it's not a bird. It's coming this way. It's making a noise. What is it? Here it is. It's Chippie. It's Chippie." Honk, 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 honk. A dandy red flying machine, as shiny and slick as a Christmas wagon, whizzed by overhead, with its great black wings flapping. Grinning Chippie in helmet and goggles was at the controls, honking the horn as hard as he could. And the folks on the ground below just seemed to go crazy with joy when they saw what it was. They hopped up and down like jumping jacks and threw hats in the air. They hurrayed and hurrahed till they were so hoarse they could not speak above a whisper. And there it is. The flying machine went over and then made a big turn and circled back to go around the field twice. Then it slowly came and made a perfect landing right near the picnic tables. When Chippie climbed out and took off his helmet and goggles, the folks just picked him up and carried him around the field singing, "Chippie is our hero." Then suddenly Chippie seemed to remember something very important, for he cried out excitedly, "Quick, take me back to the machine. I forgot my engine." "Engine?" they asked. "Did you forget to turn it off?" "No," cried Chippie. "I forgot to feed it what I had promised." "Why, how many horsepower is it?" "Horse nothing. It's a 1-crow power. Take me back, quick." So back they ran as fast as they could, and there up in front of the flying machine, in the flying engine position, was old John Crow, looking mighty mad and fidgety. He was strapped in place with his wings poked through the slots in the sides. Way out front was a funny contraption with a rod that could rise or lower by strings leading back to the control cockpit. And tied to the very end of it was the spark plug to the whole business. And what do you think it was? Well, guess. Well, I'll tell you. It's really a secret, but I know you will never mention it to anyone outside. A lollipop. A real, honest-to-goodness lollipop, fresh from Biddy O'Possum's candy store. It was placed just out of John Crow's reach, and that's what always kept him flying, trying to reach it. When Chippie wanted to gain elevation, he raised the bait, and when he wanted to come down, he lowered it. Now, wasn't that a scheme? But who wouldn't be a flying machine engine for a dandy lollipop? I know I would, wouldn't you? So Chippie untied the prize and let John Crow have it. He also had a couple more stowed away in the back of the fuselage for when he might want to start up again. Well, there's but little more to tell. Everybody just went crazy over the great invention. Chippie's fame spread far and wide, and Happy Hollow was mighty proud of its famous son. Of course, they had the flying machine patented, and nobody must use any part of the great invention without permission from the Happy Hollow Building Committee. But Chippie told me secretly that if lollipops got much higher in price, it was going to make it mighty hard for poor folks to own their own flying machines. What a pity. And the end. Chippie the Munk. And now that you've heard the story, you can look in the description of the video and find the link that will take you to the drawings that were in the book. And this is a wonderful opportunity to print out those drawings that Joe drew, and you can add your own colors to them. And so that the next time you listen to the story, you'll have the colored pages that you did on your own to compare to the book. I appreciate you listening, and I hope you had a good time.